Could I say good afternoon and welcome. Could I ask, thank you very much indeed for participating in our inquiry. If you could just introduce yourselves, please, for the record. Starting with Henry.
Thank you very much indeed. Henry Robinson, President of the CLA.
Nick von Westenholz, Chief Executive of the Crop Protection Association.
Thank you. I just have a housekeeping matter.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to place on record that I'm a member of the CLA.
Apologies. I'm not a member of any farming organisation.
How nice to be amongst friends.
Can I just say you're both very welcome. It's your first appearance before us, so I hope it's a pleasant one. Can I just say, in terms of food security, first of all, each of you, what do you think is the one issue that you would like to see to promote better food security?
Well, if you have to pin me down to one thing, I would probably say that the sustainable production is not the preserve of any one single method of production. I think there's room for all sorts, and I think we see it as a broad church.
Well, I would say we've heard about diets and about waste, and certainly agree that those are issues need to be focused on, but I think we haven't heard today so far very much about production and attempting to increase yields, and I think big issue in the UK is breaking out of the current yield plateaus that we've been experiencing for some time.
Thank you. I'd just like to turn to the recent floods and the ongoing threat of either flooding or indeed drought in other years, and just ask you, Mr. Robinson from the CLA, what assessment, I mean, I was at the NFU conference, not being a member, but I did attend part of the NFU conference last week, where we heard the percentage of land, which is at risk of, percentage of agricultural land, which is at risk of flooding on a year-on-year business. What assessment has the CLA made of the threat to food security and production of the recent flooding in the UK?
Well, recent flooding in the UK, certainly for those involved, is an agricultural disaster for them personally. It is also, I would say, an environmental disaster as well. The two are completely linked. Will it affect food security within the UK? No, I'm afraid it won't. It's simply not a large enough area. We're in a world market, and a world market will fulfil any shortfall we have in this country with imports.
If you just look though, in my own area there are going to be multiple licence applications for fracking,
yes.
And we don't yet have an abstraction policy. Does it worry you about the water use that might be required either for farming or for fracking? That there might be
I think the amount of water required for fracking is clearly an issue, and you will know as well as I do that the government has the water bill in front of the House at the moment, and clearly that is something which we have to get the distribution of water and the availability to important and indeed strategic industries has got to be got right.
Thank you. Neil Parish.
Yes, good afternoon. Are you concerned about the UK's reliance on the global market for products we do not produce here, especially perhaps on seasonality and the like? Is there any way we can change any of that?
For products we don't produce here.
Yes, that's right.
I mean,
and even
out of season products.
Oh, I see. You're not thinking bananas, or
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So you're not thinking bananas. I mean,
well,
we clearly have to import a
yes.
large amount of food.
Yes, global warming hasn't quite got that warm yet. But to be serious, no, it's about the product that we are importing, and I think not just the products that we can't produce here, also the products that we're importing when seasonally we could grow them here, but not perhaps strawberries in January or whatever.
I think the point there is that it's the variety of supply from a multitude of different destinations, including, of course, homegrown crops where we can. But food security is enhanced by being able to import and not being just dependent on supply from one area. I mean, saying we could produce it all from our own resources, if it were true, would leave us liable to a disease or a pest outbreak in this country, which would put food security at risk.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the moment with the situation, for instance, in the Ukraine, then we will be looking at, Black Sea grain produces a huge percentage of wheat, even in world market. So, there could be a problem even with something like wheat. So is there a need for us to look at growing more wheat in this country?
Well, we grow I don't go down the route of saying we need to have quotas or be growing more. The market will decide, and if there is a shortage of wheat coming from the Ukraine in the near future, like they had 2 years ago when they stopped exports, when they had a bad harvest, then the price will go up and more wheat will be grown over here.
Therefore, yes, add to security.
I would agree with that. I think it's about 60% or so total self-sufficiency for UK production at the moment, which feels quite low, but I would absolutely agree that you want a diversity, really, of supply, and you wouldn't want to put all your eggs in one basket, to use that phrase. But wheat is a very sophisticated, quite highly developed marketplace, obviously, and what you've seen, milling wheat or wheat prices generally go up in the last week because of the Ukraine crisis. That may well stimulate some sort of supply increase in future, but we wouldn't. I think a diversification of supply, both domestic and abroad, is important for food security in the UK.
And then perhaps taking a bit wider with world security, I mean, what impact do you think increased demand for food from China will have on our food security?
I think it's clearly going to be one of the major issues as to food security throughout the world. They're saying that the Asian middle class will rise from 500 million to 3 billion in the next 15 years. That is an absolutely colossal increase, and given what we know to be the case about changing diets, that will have an effect very considerably on the availability of meat and dairy products in particular.
And you're expecting that middle class in the Far East to eat more meat, are you?
I think I would, yes.
And even despite all sorts of propaganda being put about, they may still carry on eating more meat.
I think as long as food remains a free market, I think they will choose to do that, yes.
I think it's worth saying as well that you can't really pull apart domestic food security issues and global food security issues. The fact that there is going to be increased demand across the globe will have an impact on what we're required to do in the UK and Europe in terms of production. And I think that the really crucial point about increased populations, whether it's China or elsewhere in the globe, is that Europe is going to have to be part of the response to meeting that increased demand.
Because not only is it a matter of food security, it'll also be a matter of price, will it not? Because if there's a greater demand, the price will go up.
It's a market.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Richard
you.
Drax.
The next question moves on quite nicely from that one. The world's increasing, the population is increasing rather. Demand for food will increase. The EU, bless its socks, is continuing to look at imposing regulations on the farming industry, not least, of course, on its control of chemicals and pesticides. What are your concerns, Mr. Westenholz, can I start with you, about this increased use of the EU regulations that are targeting this, and of course the impact, no doubt, on yields and food production?
Well, I mean, as I said at the beginning, we have a concern about yield plateaus. That's all. The fact that there was an extended period of time post-war where cereal yields and other crop yields increased quite exponentially, and that hasn't happened in the last decade or so. And the European regulatory and policy environments don't appear to encourage any way of actually breaking out of those that stalling. The real concern is that as climate change hits over the next 30 to 50 years, and as population globally continues to increase, Europe is going to become comparatively better as a place to produce food, because there will be parts of the globe where it becomes very difficult to produce food. Despite that, it appears to me that Europe is actually sort of nobbling its own productive capacity, therefore actually requiring other areas of the world to provide
because of the
food
regulations.
Because of the
what
regulations.
you can put in the crops.
Yes.
So
Yes, that is a key. I mean, GM is obviously another concern.
And I'm assuming an awful lot of research is going on to try and reduce what we put in our crops.
Well, I think it's about
something
targeting. Absolutely. I mean, precision farming would allow you to target better, what you use in terms of inputs on your crops. I mean, most farmers would, be absolutely delighted if they were given the tools which allowed them to be much more targeted and therefore reduce their overheads in terms of inputs. So absolutely. I mean, if you look at investment in Europe in terms of crop protection products, so insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, it's dropped over the last, since the mid-90s, from about 33% of global expenditure is focused on Europe to now about 7%. So there is a desertion of investment in these technologies from
And are yields dramatically down in that period?
Well, yields have plateaued. They from sort of post-war till the 70s or 80s, you got sort of 2 to 3% yield increases decade on decade. Since the 90s, wheat yields have essentially been the same in the last sort of 15 to 20 years.
In fact, well, I could just pick up on that. I mean, I think that the real need for reform is in this process of how long and how costly it is to bring forward new products. It's an incredibly long period, something like 10 years, and a cost of something like £200 million to bring forward a new product to the market. 2/3 of that 200 million is in the authorization process. And what is happening is that people, for multinational firms, are choosing, frankly, to go elsewhere rather than do it within Europe because it's too expensive, too long and too complicated.
And which member states generally support the EU approach and which don't? Do you know?
Well, it slightly depends on the issues. I mean, there's obviously always going to be...
Well, generally on herbicides and pesticides, which EU is it?
I would say that the UK have been actually... we would have support their approach over recent times in the way that they've approached these issues, which has been very much pro-innovation, pro-science, and based on evidence. Elsewhere in Europe, there's been other countries which have not followed that, many of them. Depends on what particular issue.
The EU approach now, the
Yes.
regulatory system, which of the EU countries are backing it and which are not? Over half? Are we on our own?
Well, I mean, as I say, it's a sort of case-by-case basis. But if you take, for instance, some people here will be familiar with the recent neonicotinoid debate around bee health and pollinators, where the EU actually didn't come to a majority decision on banning those, but a number of countries, for example France, certainly voted to ban those products, whereas the UK didn't. I mean, I can provide a breakdown of how the voting...
Well, I'm just looking for a general picture on growing agricultural crops. I mean, where are we? Are EU members for or against the regulatory system generally?
Generally for.
They are for it, despite the fact yields are...
There doesn't... I mean, much of it is based obviously in the Commission, so it's not necessarily a member state by member state issue.
Right.
The Commission itself has obviously backs up the regulatory system. The Commission seems to be very comfortable with that and actually moved the last review 5-6 years ago to a hazard-based system where it looks at regulating products simply on the basis that it poses a hazard rather than actually the specific risk that it may in real life
Very
provide.
briefly, Mr. Roberts, that's the Commission, unelected commissioners. What are the countries saying? Can you expand on what you think the whole of the countries are feeling about all this regulation?
I'm not in a position to give you, I'm afraid,
You're not. Okay.
what's happening in Europe. I could just give you 2 examples as to where we are on the wrong end of chemicals being restricted in this country. Right. And one is the well-known example of azulam, which has been, we only get as an annual license now, and it is essential for controlling bracken in upland areas for sheep production.
Yep.
And the other, of course, is the well-known example of warfarin,
Yep.
which is costing far too much to relicense, and we lose as of the 1st of April this year for control of that invasive species, the grey squirrel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I turn to organic production, please? Is it possible to reconcile the identified need for greater output produced sustainably with reliance on more organic and extensive agricultural production?
If you're asking me, I find it very difficult to. I really do. I think I would go back, if I take you back 200 years when Thomas Malthus was writing, he didn't think it was possible to feed the world when there was 1 billion people in it. We're now feeding 7 billion, wasting a remarkable amount of food as it is at the moment, and food has never been cheaper as a percentage of average income in this country at least. So technologically, we don't, and I think the technological route is the solution to this problem. We need to get better ways and better methods and more science and better science in order to find our way through to food security.
Mr.
Yes, I mean, when we talk about sustainable intensification, it's a sort of buzz phrase often used around these discussions. You know, we are talking about increasing output on the same or even less, using less resources, so less land being an obvious one. And I do find it hard to see, and it was discussed in the last session, how we would achieve that through entirely organic approaches. Having said that, you know, I do think it's not just about being able to use more inputs or more pesticides or even fertilizers. It's about taking quite an integrated approach. So it is about taking new approaches in terms of cultivations, rotations, precision technology, but also using, in a targeted manner, technology through things like pesticides and fertilizers.
And can I ask you both, please, is there any evidence to suggest that organic farming encourages greater biodiversity rather than conventional agricultural systems which meet agri-environmental policy requirements?
I think the the key actually to biodiversity is about management, is about the approach to farming you take. There was some research done recently by the University of Southampton, and it showed that some of the best results in terms of biodiversity, and this used farmland birds as its indicator, was through either environmental stewardship approaches or conservation grade specific wildlife management approach to farming, and not organic. But if you had an organic farming approach which actually followed those same criteria, then that would have equally positive effects. So it's not about organic, it's not about use of pesticides or not. It's about the specific approach you take to creating a habitat alongside your farming, food production, that encourages biodiversity.
I would echo that, and it is exactly what we do as part of an HLS farm at home. And environmental management requires active management and setting aside land for doing good things for the environment. And the issue, of course, is how you then pay for that, because it's land which is then not producing food.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Roger Williams.
Perhaps a question to the CLA. Do you think that the EU and UK farmers have poorer access to new technology that farmers, for instance, in America or South America, in the USA or South America would have?
Well, there's two potential answers to your question, and one is if by technology you mean things like precision farming and GPS and satellite and robotic tractors, then the answer is no, I don't think. I mean, it's certainly available over here, and certainly larger farms are actually using those. Of course, for any new technology, you need to be profitable in order to be able to pay for it. If the second part of that is if by that you mean GM as new technology, then clearly the answer is no. We haven't got the same access to that, and I think that on balance is a shame.
And would you say the necessary advice is available to farmers in order to change their production methods to
We've lost a great deal of the advisory system. Certainly there's an enormous role for the levy boards and for the farm advisory service and a lot of close to the market advice there. I think the area where I think there is an obvious and distinct shortage is in the scientific research and development. And then, of course, extending that knowledge into the marketplace after that.
Perhaps I could ask the representative of the Crop Protection Association what farmers and landowners should be doing to access the technology needed to improve their yields.
It's a good question, because I think it's something which has occupied the minds of successive governments recently, actually, that the whole issue of knowledge transfer, how we try and connect up the R&D work that's being done to the farm, to beyond the farm gate. I think the agri-tech strategy recently launched by this government very much focused on doing that, but of course the proof will be in the pudding. There is a lot of positive intent there in terms of knowledge transfer, but it remains to be seen whether that actually, it's obviously early days, whether that actually gets borne out. But Henry already spoke about some of those mechanisms or vehicles, such as the levy boards, farm advisory services, etc., which can actually link up. And I think it's important that those are used, as well as maybe more informal routes, such as advisors, agronomists, crop advisors, etc., who farmers listen to and take advice from.
Just going back to the question of EU regulation, I'm sometimes told that research is really cramped because a regulation may be that the amount of a particular chemical that would appear in groundwater was of such a low concentration. In fact, the only criteria that's used is, can it be measured? And if it can be measured, then that would stop the research going ahead. And so many potentially new chemicals are ruled out because of that particular regulation.
Yeah,
is that a fair?
I think it's broadly recognised that the regulations around drinking water are basically arbitrary, and that the very, very low level threshold for chemicals in drinking water poses no risk whatsoever to health, but that is where we are. It's an EU directive, and it is posing problems. For example, metaldehyde slug pellets, which are widely used, very much under the spotlight at the moment, because they do occasionally crop up at levels above that threshold, even though nobody is suggesting that they pose any risk to public health above those levels. But the industry is working very hard, voluntary approach to stewardship, to try and keep those levels well below the threshold.
We need to move on. Mark Spencer.
Mr. Robinson, I just want to talk about small farmers, and maybe you could tell us what defines a small farmer in your answer. But should the government be doing anything to support small farmers, or should we just leave it to the market?
Well, the UK has a larger average farm size than most of the rest of Europe, but that doesn't mean to say that the holdings are any bigger. We've got, I think in my terms, a small farmer would probably be in two figures rather than three figures of acreage. But it's very hard to be specific, because if you're on an intensive system on 50 acres, you can be producing a great deal of food. It is in essence, with small farmers, they're very good at finding niche markets and producing local produce for local areas. And of course, that's it. But I think it has to remain part of it is part of the market. There's help being pushed towards them as part of the Common Agricultural Policy reforms, but it's pretty small and pretty limited, I would have said.
Okay.
Neil Parish.
Yes, so on the same lines, really, Mr. Robinson. How important are new entrants to the farming industry for our future food security?
Well, behind your question, I suspect, is the knowledge that the average age of farmers is about 58 or 59, which I used to think was rather old, but it's clearly not. But why?
As fast approaching, I'm inclined to agree with you.
We always say we need new entrants. Actually, what we need is good farmers, and I don't see as long as the farmer is technologically good and is working hard, which is what will happen if the market makes him do that. It's a market-based system. that's where it will.
But, you know, you as the CLA, representing the CLA, perhaps shared farming initiatives, that
We
type
are
of thing?
working, I was just going to, we pioneered shared farming in the 1980s, and coming out on July the 2nd this year will be our updated shared farming. We're as innovative and forward-thinking as anyone about this. Contract farming has taken a lot of the ground on that. But for livestock systems, shared farming is extremely useful.
Thank you. I think I'll hand over to you the last part of the question.
I've got a particular interest in tenant farmers and whether there's a problem of having
In what sort of
new
farming?
entrants
New entrants,
into
yes.
tenant farms. Not so much, I mean, I don't know if it's a problem of succession, but is there more we could be doing to encourage new entrants into tenancies?
I think it's you know, clearly education coming out of the agricultural colleges, making it, I mean, land available. That is, you know, that's certainly happening with regard to new enterprises, people doing.
Well, I'll give you a little story that was I heard about it on the radio, even though it's a local boy, a local lad, wanted to become a farmer, obviously had no access to land, no family connections with farming, and Castle Howard gave him a field so he could start his rare breeds.
Yep.
So it's just how to explore and what should the
But wasn't that almost exactly what would have been covered by the CLA share farming agreement? There you are. You have somebody putting the land in, and the other man putting his expertise and perhaps a percentage of the stock. I mean, that system is available already. I think we get very hung up on the difference, or on the similarity of owning land and farming land. The two are separate occupations.
Yeah. But it's as far as you're concerned that the
Share farming
works very well.
Share farming is a good system. I was speaking to a farmer the other day who had 8 different share farming arrangements, and the real point, he's had them all for 30 years. They've just been carried on.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I am going to wind up now because we've got another panel as well, but you've been incredibly patient and generous with your time. Thank you. And if I could invite the next panel to